Welcome to the week 4 of React Nights. This time we are going to talk about forms. Sorry for a bit delay.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, on a week 4 you can also join the Hangout stream. And besides that, I would like to have a small announcement. Tomorrow we are doing a front-end beers here in STRB with our front-end team. If you would like to participate, please do so. We are starting at 6, I believe. 6 it is. And we are going to be on a scroll bar. This time we are having a new beer on tap. It's a Pilsen. You will love it. So yeah, please join me. Otherwise I will drink it all by myself and I won't review how it works. Anyways, here is Pedro, and Pedro is going to tell you some magic about forms. Enjoy.
All right. So we're going to talk about this week 4, obviously. And we're going to start with forms. So I'm sure some of you are already familiar with forms, but what we're going to talk about specifically is how forms work in React. And it's pretty cool. I hope you guys enjoy it. So how does the standard boring HTML form work? If you're familiar with other frameworks, other front-end development, you know that the typical form is like this. So we have a form tag. We have inputs with labels. Usually it's a good practice to have a label with for. In this case, you have for email. That's associated with the ID email in the input. So something like this, the form has an action and a method. And when you submit, what's going to happen is that it's going to use the data from the DOM. So it's going to read whatever you wrote in the input. And it's going to make a request for wherever you told it to go. So in this case, form action, you could write some page here and it would get the names of the input and send the data that's there. So everything would be happening in the DOM. And the worst thing about this process is that it requires the page to refresh. So the data would only be sent in a request that would refresh the page. And that's kind of boring. Nowadays we have better ways of doing this. So how do we do it in single page apps? The way that we would do it in React is that instead of having that action property, we would have an onSubmit function prop, as you can see here in the form, in the render method. I hope you can see it. And so it would call a function, and we're going to make it that everything is using JavaScript. Whoops. Okay, so everything's going to be using JavaScript. We're going to find a way to put all the data inside JavaScript so that it's sent to a JavaScript function inside React, and we don't have to deal with the DOM at all, which means we're not going to need to refresh the page. We can just use event prevent default like Ossia used in the last lesson to prevent the page from refreshing, and it's just going to give us a much smoother experience. So before we get into that, and I'll show you in an example very soon, let's talk about the definition of uncontrolled components, which is a concept that React introduces. So with uncontrolled components, which are the first case that I talked about, values are going to be in the DOM. You can actually set the initial value of the input with React by setting a prop called default value or default checked. But everything else is just going to happen in the DOM automatically. And actually, there's a particular type of input, which is the file input, that's always going to be uncontrolled. So for that one, you're always going to need to use traditional JavaScript to deal with the DOM. But with controlled components, everything is going to be in JavaScript in React, like I told you. And all you need to do is add a value prop to the component that's going to pass in to that text input, for example, whatever you have there. So the value is going to be coming from JavaScript. And this allows for a lot of features that we're going to see, like, for example, validating fields live instead of waiting to refresh the page to see if there was any error. And also, for example, conditionally disabling the submit button while the form is submitting. You can do this to different types of form components like inputs, text areas, or selects. So React recommends that we use controlled components in most cases because they give us a lot more control. Another thing that I would like to talk about is that React uses synthetic events. So when we're using things like onSubmit and onClick, as you've probably used in buttons. We're not using the traditional DOM events. We are using some React wrappers around that. And what that's going to do is the usage is going to be practically the same, but there are some performance optimizations, and it's going to be more consistent across browsers. Some examples of events like this are onChange or onSubmit that you can put on forms like I just showed you. And mouse events like onClick, onMouseEnter, onMouseLeave, which give us a lot of possibilities. You can check this link later for the whole list of events you can use with React. So finally, let's get to a demonstration that I hope makes all of this a little bit more clear.
Pedro, please, before you jump into demonstration, could you go back on the Hangouts and share your screen again? For some reason, it got stopped sharing.
Damn. That's bad. Is it working now? All good? Cool.
Yep.
All right, so I set up an example here. Let me see if it's running. It is. So this is just a random form that I made with two different types of inputs. So you have first name, which is going to be a text, and you can pick your favorite fruit from this list over here. So right now it's just a normal React form, which means that, is this the code for it? Yeah. So I use some styling, but as you can see, we have a form with action. Should I maximize it? Can everybody see it? Is this okay, or do you want me to make the font bigger? Let's make the font bigger. Whoa. I don't know any shortcut for it. Maybe 20. It's gonna work. Too big. Hopefully this is better. If you have any problems, just use the Hangout.
You can use Command Plus if you want to.
Command Plus? All right, I guess, is this good enough?
Or you can guys join Hangouts.
Yeah, because in the back it's probably really difficult, and I can't like zoom in a lot.
It's on a week 4 on our slide.
Yeah. So we're just using styled components here to show labels, to show the input. We have a select with different options, and everything's working right now. So what's gonna happen is that if I put my name here, for example, and I pick my favorite fruit, like for example, lime, right now this is gonna send us to the root path with a post request. So in this case, I didn't even prepare it, so it's just gonna break the site. But if I went to the network tab in Chrome and I checked out the last request, okay, it's not here, but let's pretend that it is because I just opened it. That would be here something saying that I just made a request and the data was first name and favorite fruit with the options that I picked. But we don't want to have to refresh the page. We want to use JavaScript. So the way that we do that with React is that we are gonna, need to make this bigger, sorry. All right. So we can go to the input here, and we'll pass a value. And we can go to the select and also pass a value. In this case, let's pass one of the fruits that's already here, so lime. So now that I'm passing a value with JavaScript, if we go back, you can see that I can't change anything because it's just setting the value to be whatever was there before. So now we need something that actually takes our input and updates it. And we're gonna use an event handler for that. And that's called onChange. So if I go to the input, I'm sorry, I need to remember to maximize this. OnChange, this takes a function that uses an event and, wrong keyboard. This takes an event, and with event target value, I can get the value that's in there. But of course, we need to put this somewhere. So we're using React, so we're gonna use state. And we're gonna need two things in our state. We're gonna need first name, and we're gonna need favorite fruit. In the beginning, they're gonna be empty. So these are gonna be the initial values. And this shouldn't be inside render actually. It should be outside. Cool. And now what I can do in these function handlers is that I can, with the function, I can call this set state. For the first one, I would update the first name to be event target value. And I will do the same thing in the second one. So I'm just gonna copy paste here in the select. Exact same thing, but this time it would change the favorite fruit. So this makes it so everything is happening inside JavaScript now. So these are now controlled components. So if I go here, hopefully everything will work just fine. Wait, it's not. Let me refresh. Something's off, let me check. Oh yeah, because I'm still keeping the value that I passed in the first place, so obviously we need to get it from the state. So the value for the select is gonna be this state favorite fruit. And the value in this one is gonna be this state first name. Cool. All right. So now it should be a controlled form. Yeah, so it's updating. And how do you get the data to actually do things with it? We don't need this anymore. We just need a non-submit. Sorry, forgot to maximize again. On submit handler, where we can call a function. So let's create a function for it. Handle submit. So this function is going to be called when we press the submit button, because by default this button that's inside the form already has the type submit. It's the default type for button. So if we have a button inside a form tags, inside form tags, it's going to submit it automatically when we click it. So it's going to call handle submit, and here this takes an event because it comes from here. So it takes an event. We need to call, we don't want to refresh the page, we don't need to. So we need to call event prevent default. And then actually if we log the state, we're already going to have updated values of the form. So in the end you could write another function here that validates everything, or you could send it to you can make a request with it. So I hope it's clear how this works. Is it good? Yeah? Good. Okay. Right, so let's move on. So this is how you make a form, an uncontrolled form, into a controlled form. And it gives you a lot more power because you always have the state with the values, and you can do whatever you want with it after every update. Cool. Now, let's continue. So, of course, as you saw, I did some repetitive things when I was coding right now. I had to write on change twice and get the event target value twice. So there's a lot of things going on here. And it's especially going to happen if you add validation and errors. There's a lot of things going on here that are repetitive and could obviously be abstracted with a library. So there are some form libraries in React that we could use to make everything simpler. Now the first question is, should you use a library for forms? And there are pros and cons, like there are pros and cons for everything. The questions I'd like you to think about when you make this question are that the pros for forms are that they're a quick, easy way to abstract complex logic and complex forms. So you can just hide all of that complexity and have it working automatically. They can reduce tedious, repetitive tasks that you find yourself doing too much. But of course, you have to consider the cons, that too much abstraction could also be obscuring things, or sometimes when you really want to customize the behavior of the form, it could be making some assumptions that then you have to work around to make things work the way you want. So you should consider that. And also that libraries add size to your bundle, so they make pages slower to load. The most popular form libraries in React are Redux Form, which used to be more popular a while ago. And we're not going to recommend Redux Form right now, especially compared to other solutions. mostly because it requires Redux. And usually forms don't need to be in the global app state, like Kostya just told you in the last week. Forms are usually local, they're inside a page, so there's no need for them to be a global thing in your app. You should keep that logic as isolated as possible. And so a better solution that we have for forms right now is Formic. That's the best current solution, and it's the one I'm going to show to you. It's lighter than Redux form, a little bit. It has some magic, but it also allows you to customize things manually when you need to, and just use regular JavaScript. And it's got a great integration with the Yup library, which is another library for validation. That's going to make validation a lot easier for you than doing it just with standard JavaScript. So for form validation, without a library, there is not a standard way to do it. You just have to get functions, get the values, and validate them against the regex, or see if they're truthy or falsy, something like that. So there's no standard way to make things easier for you. But for example, if you use the Formic library with the Yup library that works very well with it, you can define schemas like this one here in the example, and just define for each input what you expect and what's the error message going to be in each case. So email, you could say automatically that you need it to look like an email, and say that if it's not, you just show email is not valid. And you can set a lot of other things like minimum length, maximum length, a lot of stuff. It's pretty cool. So demonstration number 2, I'm actually not gonna code, but what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna show you a comparison between a simple form that I made. So I created this form with some really basic validation that doesn't make any sense, but it's just for an example. So the first input says you need to have 4 to 8 characters, and the second one has to say strv. If it doesn't, it's just gonna fail. So I'm gonna show you the code. So there's some validation going on here. If I submit, it's gonna show me errors. So yeah. And first, I built it. Let me maximize it. So this is the solution for it using React, just like I showed you in the first example. So we have, these are styled components, but if it says input, it's an input. If it says form, it's a form. So this is a typical form like I showed you before, with onSubmit, with labels, ID, name, value, and onChange. And you can see that I had to do some things like, for example, in the state here, I had to create a different state for values for both the inputs. One of them is characters and the other is strv. And for the errors, I also had to create a separated state. Then I also needed to create a change handler that's going to take a field name, and it's going to update that field name with event target value. So things that I did before that we're doing here. And on handle submit, when we're submitting the form, I'm running a validation function. And look at this validation function. You can see that there's a lot of ifs, there's a lot of repetitive code. And even though you can make it look a little bit better, it would be great to have a better solution for it. Because if you start doing a lot of complicated validation, these functions can become confusing very easily. So the other form, so what I did was that, whoop, not the right window, yeah. So I made the exact same form with Formic, which already has an advantage, that is that if I'm typing, and this one must say strv, and I stop typing and I click outside, it's going to show me the error right away, because this is good practice, and it's something that Formic's going to do automatically for you with very little hassle. And if I show you the code in Formic for the exact same form, you can see that it's a lot shorter. The other one was 90-something lines. This one is about almost 60. What we're using, and I'm going to show to you how they work, is the Formic object and the field object from Formic, and the Yup validation, like I mentioned before. So you can see that there's a lot of things that are already being taken care of automatically for me without me having to worry about it. So I'm using this Formic object component, wrapping the form, the usual form like we had before, and it takes a validation schema like this one. And simply by passing this validation schema here with the way that Yup requires you to write it, it's already going to know how it should validate it, and this is much shorter and descriptive and more concise than writing a huge function like we saw before. And you can see that my handle submit function only says success because it's only going to run if my form is valid. And I don't need to keep track of any value, any on-change handler. Actually, the only thing I'm passing to the inputs here, and this is a styled component as prop that tells me that this input should work as a field from Formic. So it's actually not an input. It's this special Formic component called field. And you just pass it the name characters, and it's already going to know that when you change it, it changes the value of characters in its internal state. You can see that I didn't have to set any state. It just takes care of that whole thing for you and makes the validation really great. So it's awesome, and we're going to implement this later with our project after the presentation. And also, it's also passing me two objects called errors and touched. These are objects with the names of the fields. So they're going to have two properties. One of them is going to be characters. The other one's going to be strv. And it's going to see if a field has been touched. It's going to see if there's an error in that field, and automatically it's going to show that error. And it's all coming from here inside. So this, you're probably not familiar with this pattern yet. So the way you use Formic, and we're going to do it later, is that you pass it a function. So there's a Formic component here. It closes here. And inside of it, we're not going to have React. We're going to have, we are, but this is a function that's going to pass a bunch of helpers that are already included in Formic. And by using these, we can abstract a lot of the logic that we had before. So I hope this is making sense. Yeah. If not, you can just make questions anytime. Cool. Back to the presentation. All right. And at last, before we get into live coding, I would just like to talk about some UI, UX suggestions for forms, even though it's not React itself, but I think these are important. I read in an article that you should give feedback after the user finishes providing an answer. So when they're starting, you can see that with Formic, when they blur away from the input, we're showing the error. That's a really good behavior because we're not frustrating the user right away when they start typing. We're not showing errors right away. That could be annoying. Or in situations in which people need help sooner, you should give feedback sooner. So after they submit the form and it already told people that there's a bunch of errors, then you can show errors right away so that they can get rid of them and just keep going. So that's a good way to do forms. So my suggestions for forms are to show field errors on blur before the first submit attempt, and then always show them. Don't forget the label tags. I hope you noticed in the examples that we have 4. Each label tag has a form prop, and it should match the ID prop of the input that it's associated with. This really helps accessibility. For example, if a blind person is using a screen reader, they're going to be able to tell that there's a label that has to do with a certain input. And actually in React, you need to write HTML for and not for, because form is already the JavaScript for. You should show a loading state while a form is submitting. You should disable submission of a form while it is submitting to prevent multiple requests. You don't want someone to spam the submit button and be sending a lot of requests to the server. So as soon as it's submitting, you should disable the button. And you should also avoid input font sizes below 16 pixels because iPhones, usually mobile Safari, is just going to zoom in and make it look kind of weird. So just use fonts that are big enough, and that's not going to happen. And finally, remember to use the right types in input. So for example, if you have an input tag that's supposed to be an email, don't forget to write type email so that, for example, so that it's already auto-completed with your email if it's something that your browser has memorized, and it uses the right keyboard in mobile phones. So if you have a tel type input, which is for phones, it's already going to show you the phone keyboard. So this is really good for user experience. All right, and now, if you have any questions, you can ask them now, or we can go to the live coding. I'm gonna build the sign-up form for the site using Formic, and then you can ask more questions at the end. Yeah. So can I go on? I hope you're following everything.
To those errors. So the first time you would show only on submit. Did I understand it correctly?
The first time on blur. So if they're typing and then they focus on the next input or they click away, you show it when they finish typing. Yeah.
Isn't it better to use on input, an event? Because you were talking on submit event and on change event.
Yeah.
But in JavaScript, there is also like on input many other events. So when you are typing on input events, like trigger itself every time you type another letter. So it can give you immediate, feedback if something is wrong. So isn't it better to use this event instead of on change? Because in case of on change, you have to click somewhere else, right?
Well, yeah, we were using onChange to update the value. So of course, that's like when you type a letter, it's gonna show the letter in the input. But you have the onBlur event, which is probably the best solution for in the beginning, because it's just gonna run when you click away from the input. So onChange should be used to update the value. OnBlur should be used to show the errors, usually. But after you submit, you can use onChange to show the errors, because it's just gonna show them quicker. All right, so does that answer the question?
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, let's go to live coding. We have time. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna go to the project right now. Yeah, cool. That's good. Okay. And so I just opened the project, the one that we have. I did set up some stuff ahead of time, so that's faster. Yarn start. Should be loading anytime. Yeah, so I set up some things already that you've already done before, so they shouldn't be anything new. So I changed the layout up here a little bit just to make it better. And I already set up the sign up page where nothing is happening right now. So what I'm gonna do is build the form here that's going to allow us to create a customer that can buy t-shirts and do all that sort of stuff. So let's find the sign up folder. And I already set up all the styles, so it's gonna look kind of nice. But yeah, later you can use my styles or you can make your own. So right now all we have is the layout with an H1 inside. And we're gonna use Formic here, right? So first thing we're gonna do, let's import Formic that we're gonna use for this form. And so, wait, actually there's something I should show you before. So before everything, you saw there's a lot of repetitive things with inputs. So with each input, I want to show an error below it in red. I want to show the input. I want to show a label. So I already prepared this component that's going to do that for me. And it's already using the field from Formic, which is an abstraction that's going to make things a lot faster so that I don't have to use value and I don't have to use onChange or any of that stuff. So the way it's working right now, and you can check the Formic docs because there's a lot of ways that you can implement this. But so I'm using this field component, and the only thing that I'm gonna pass it is the field name, because that's all it needs to make the form work. Everything else is just gonna know what to do, even with errors and considering whether it has been touched. Because then in the render function, and again, this takes a function automatically that's gonna pass field and form. Field, which I'm spreading here inside the input, this is an input, it's already gonna pass it a name, a value, and a non-change handler. So it's gonna take care of that. And then for errors, I'm using this form here. I'm getting errors and touched from it. I'm saying that there's an error if the property name in the touched object is true. So if the property has been touched, and if the error, I'm converting the error to a Boolean, if there's an error, so if there's an error and the component is considered to have been touched, it's going to show that error. So has error, and it shows the error below it. So there's already an abstraction here, because with this input type, all I'm going to have to do, instead of setting up value and state and onChange and all of that, I'm just going to have to pass in a label, the name, and the label is what's going to be written above the input, and the type, so text, email, password, whatever. So that's going to make things a lot quicker, which is good because we don't have a lot of time. So it's going to be great. All right, so now that we know that, let's start with formic here. And as we've seen, formic takes a function. We're going to see what to pass in later. And the function is going to return code, right? So inside, we're just going to put a form, which I've already set up, but it's just a styled form. And this global form error I'll use later, probably, but it's already here imported. All right, so first thing, when the form submits, it's going to have to call something. And formic already is going to send me handle submit, which I should simply put here. So the argument to the function inside formic, this is a render prop, we'll talk about it more later. These are just things that, according to the props that you pass to the formic component, different things are going to come out of the argument of the first function that you're rendering inside here. So in this case, automatically it's going to send you handle submit, which is actually going to call the onSubmit that you put on formic here. So this part kind of looks the same, but it's something small anyway. So you pass handle submit here, and it's going to run the onSubmit from here, which is this handle submit, and it's a function we're going to create, right? And that's just gonna, this is only going to run after we add validation if the form is successful. So if we console log something like success, that's only going to run if the validation passes. So we're set up. Good. Cool. We need parentheses here. Good. And here. Not these ones. All right. Cool. And what are we going to have inside the forms? We are going to use the input that I showed you before. So if we import input from components input, let me see what kind of export it is. It's default export. So this should work. I'm going to have to open this again. Okay, input. So we're gonna need 4 inputs. And another thing formic takes, like I showed you before, is initial values. So let's get that from this initial values. And let's set them up here. So we're going to have 4 fields in this signup form. We're going to have first name, so that maybe you can have a text that says hi in the name of the person. We're going to have email. We're going to have a password. And we're going to have a password confirmation field. And these are all going to be empty in the beginning. And they're being passed on to formic. So as soon as we have inputs, and I showed you the code before, that all they need is basically a name to work. If we pass the right names, and it knows the initial value, they're just going to work. So all we need to do is pass in these properties for the input. let's also set up labels and types. So the label for the first one is going to be first name. Type. Actually, I set up the default type to be text. I don't know if you saw it. Type text. So if there's no type, it's just going to be text automatically, which an input would be anyway. So we don't need the type here. Label here, email address, and the type here is going to be email. Label here is going to be password. Type password so that it hides what we're writing. If you have an input with a type of password, it's just going to show you those circles. And here, confirm password, also with the type of password. And finally, what we need is a button. We already have a button component from the last lectures. So let's get that button. And the default type for a button is submit. So if we're putting it inside a form, when you click it, it's going to submit the form automatically. And let's just call it sign up. So this should work. The errors should already work because I'm handling the error logic inside the input component. There's no validation yet, but it should be doing something. Let's check it out. Not here. I should close this. Close this one. Whoop. Wait, we're not importing it right? No problem. Because this is not the way that you import it actually. It's like this. It's a named import, the format component. Alright, so now let's see if it's working. It is. So I already styled everything, so you can see that it's showing the 4 inputs and a button here in the end.
You closed the Hangouts.
I did? Oh man, yeah. That sucks. Okay. I guess I can go to the link again.
Yes.
I mean, it's better to have a part of it than not have any. Oh man, anonymous window. Alright. I hope I didn't close anything else, did I? It's the only thing, right? It's hard to remember all this stuff while you're focused. Okay. Whoop, join. Share screen. Okay, are we back? Everything good? Cool. All right, so let's go on. So we have this form here, and we can already type stuff. So we didn't need to set up any state, any on-change handlers. That's already done for you. And if we sign up, okay, there's this default HTML validation. Anyway, okay, what's missing now is validation, obviously. So how do we add validation to this form? The way that we do it, as in an example before, because I'm using the up library, is that we need a validation schema here from the up library. So let's go to sign up. Let's create a file. Let's call it schema.js. And I already have it ready because I think it's easy to understand how this schema works when you look at it, right? I mean, it doesn't need a lot of explanation, or does it? Like, it's just an object with the different fields. And then, for example, email is a string. I already explained this one. So for password, it's a string, minimum of 6 characters. Otherwise, it says that the password is too long. Maximum is 30. And we have some rejects here. This one means that you need at least one number. This one means you need at least one lowercase letter. Again, this is just an example of how you could validate a password. And that the field must be filled in. So for that, you can just add .required and show the error message. So we're exporting a schema from here. And now all we need to do is import it here. Whoops. Schema and pass it here. So now, because we already have all the, I used that field component from Formic here, that uses this form thing in render to pass which components have been touched and which ones have errors. So it's already gonna know from the validation what the errors are and show them if this works. Let's hope I didn't make any mistake. So now if I'm typing and I blur,
You are muted.
whoops. Thanks for that though. Does it start off muted? All right, is it cool now? I hope there aren't a lot of people watching from home. Well, it's better than before anyway. At least we have Hangouts. Yeah. All right, so if I blur away from this input, it's supposed to show me an error, but not yet, because I must have forgotten something. So let's find out what it is. Validation schema. The inputs are here. This should work.
Did you copy the code to schema? Is it empty file?
Oh, maybe I didn't save. Actually, I was practicing the other day and maybe I just forgot to save the schema. Okay, let's refresh and try again.
It's valid, actually, no?
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So let's start with an email. All right, cool. So it's showing. Cool. So this is working now. It's showing us errors, and it's actually not gonna let me sign up. Okay, ignore the HTML error. Or let's just put a valid email here, but an invalid password. So this one doesn't have any numbers. It doesn't match. Okay, so it doesn't let me sign up. It's automatically blocking it because we have validation. So what else can we do in this form now? The logic of when we submit the form, we want to create a customer. And I'm gonna leave that for the later lecture because this is already taking a while. So, okay. So handle submit already takes the values from the form. We don't have to worry about that. An object with the values is just gonna be here automatically. And the second argument in handle submit allows us to use all those Formic helpers that can make things very easy. So the one that we want in handle submit is called set submitting, so that when we submit the form on Formic's internal state, it's going to say that the form is submitting. So it's going to set submitting to true. It's going to make, so what we want to do, we want to set submitting to true. Then we want to make some kind of request. And then we want to say, we want to tell the user that they signed up. So for that, we are gonna need component state. Let's try to do this really quick. So let's create state here that says that user has signed up. In the beginning, they haven't, so it's false. Whoops. It's okay, yeah. And then let's assume that the request is gonna be successful. In that case, it's gonna set the state has signed up to true. Otherwise, I mean, if this was a real request with async await, this would be like an async method, and we would make all this stuff inside a try block. We'd make requests inside a try block, so that if there was an error, if for example you sent invalid data to the, if for example somebody already signed up with that email that you're providing, it throws an error, and you would show the error here. And in the end, outside of the try catch block, because it doesn't matter if there was an error or if things were successful, of course you want to set submitting to false. Cool. What's the thing here? Yeah. Okay, so how do we use this? Here in the render, in the function that's inside Formic, we can pass is submitting, and we can use that for two things. We can use that to disable the button. This is the default HTML prop disabled. That doesn't let the button do anything. That's going to be equal to is submitting. And the other thing we can do is, according to whether the form is submitting or not, we can show signing up, or we can show sign up. Is that it? Which actually we're not going to be able to test, but I guess you know how this works, right? Because we don't have a real request. Yeah. Oh, but actually, if you do sign up successfully, we can like render success. So we can show a layout with an H1 tag that's aligned to the center. Whoop. Yeah, and it can say you've signed up. Cool. And so here, when we render, we check the state that we just created, and if this state has signed up, we return this render success. So now, if we give the form valid information, let's try it. First name could be anything, email, an email nobody's used before, password, something, and I make sure it matches down here. So now it should be passing, so it shows you've signed up. Yeah, so that's what we want. And the last thing we could do, but I'm actually not gonna do, yeah, is that we could, if we want to show form global errors, so if we want to show request errors, we could create another state for like global error, and that's going to be, when I submit the code for this lesson, it's going to be there. Global error, in the beginning it's going to be empty, but in case of catching an error in the request of submitting the form, you can set the global error to something, and then show it, for example, under the sign up title. So you could show it like in red over here. You could show something like this email has already been used. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it. I hope you understood how you can make a form using Formic, how you can do it using React, and why one can save you a lot of work. Yeah, cool. So I guess I also closed my presentation, so it's not here anymore. So I'm gonna go have to get it. I really shouldn't have closed that window. Oh. Yeah. Where's my drive? So we were in live coding. Come on. Okay. Yeah, so that was it. That's how you can build a sign-up form in React with a library. That makes things a lot easier. And the homework is for you to make a login page with the login form. So the styles are already there, but you can make your own too. It just needs an email field and a password field, so there shouldn't be anything new. It should be pretty straightforward. And that's it for me. Any questions you can ask now. I think we have time. Yeah. Any questions?
Maybe question about the homework. So should we persist the user once we get the sign up, or once we do the sign up, to make sure that the login is successful, or?
Yeah. You mean after logging in, starting the token somewhere? That's actually what. Is that it?
Yeah. Just if you do the sign up of some user, and then you wanted to log in, right? So you need to check if the email matches, if the password matches, something like that, or just make the login screen with validation, and that's it.
So definitely check the API in Commerce Layer for that, and now you should handle the login. But Pavel is also going to talk more deeply about authentication and what you should do when you submit the form, and good practices for that. So that should answer everything. Yeah. Anything else? I hope that means you've understood everything. All right.